Hello, I'm Ananth with NetSurian, and I wanted to take some time to go over the ransomware attack that became very well described just before the July 4th long weekend here in the United States. The attack was perpetrated through a solution called Kaseya VSA. And in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about what happened, how we responded, and what were some lessons learned. So what is it that actually happened in the Kaseya attack, and how was it different than SolarWinds, which happened a few months ago? What steps did NetSurian take to protect its customers? If you have a managed threat protection solution, then which components were relevant in addressing such attacks? Of course, you don't want to waste a good crisis, so what lessons were learned for us internally and for our customers? So what exactly is it that happened? Well, the Kaseya Virtual System Administrator, or VSA, is a tool that's popular with managed service providers, or MSPs, and they use it to do remote administration. It allows them to be very efficient and have a single system administrator sit at one location, the MSP location, and then through VSA, it looks like he's actually sitting at the endpoint of various customers at various sites. So it's a very popular tool in that RMM, remote monitoring and management space. So what is it that went down? Well, on Friday, July the 2nd, around 2 p.m., there began to be chatter on Reddit that if you had a server running Kaseya VSA on your MSP premises, why then that server was being abused to distribute ransomware. And this smelled like the supply chain attack from November, December, which affected instances of SolarWinds. Now, Kaseya themselves host VSA, and it didn't seem like any of those instances were affected. So this really impacted those that purchased the VSA software and chose to host it themselves. Kaseya, of course, having investigated this by around 4 p.m., sent out an advisory saying, yeah, this is a problem. And if you're running VSA on-prem yourself, why then we recommend that you shut it down until we sort out exactly what's going on. As a precaution, they shut down anything that they were running as well, even though at the time it didn't seem like that had been affected. They naturally notified law enforcement and engaged Mandiant to assist them with incident response. After the dust had settled, Kaseya estimated that about 60 MSP customers and downstream about 800 to 1600 of their customers have been affected by this incident. This is orders of magnitude smaller than the SolarWinds attack, which was thought to be affecting about 18,000 customers, and even smaller than Hafnium. And those, of course, didn't quite get as much press. Everyone's on edge now with ransomware, and this is a big deal. We don't want to minimize it simply because of size, but it's worthwhile considering it. Now, the ransom note declared that the attacker was ransomware evil, or REvil as they're known. This is a cybercrime actor based in Russia. And they demanded ransom depending upon whether you were the end customer, the MSP, and they even published a everybody can get this if someone will give us 72 million kind of a thing. By the way, no one's given them, as far as we are aware, any money. President Biden of the United States apparently had a word with his counterpart in Russia. And since then, for whatever reason, the websites of this cybercrime actor have gone away. Is it because of that conversation? Or maybe is it because the Russians acted, or is it because they've decided to fold up their shop and rebrand themselves? Well, that has happened before with Grand Crab. So no one's quite sure, but this attacker seems to have folded up shop from best we can tell. So was this really supply chain, or was it vulnerability? Now, initially, it was thought to be supply chain similar to SolarWinds, but in fact, it wasn't. The attacker exploited vulnerabilities in the VSA web-facing code, and they particularly went after those vulnerable servers that were hosted by MSPs themselves, ones that face the internet. So this isn't really supply chain, in which case the code that originally came from Kaseya would be compromised at the time of the compile, the build, which happened in SolarWinds. That did not happen here. But because of how they were distributing a piece of malware, it's easy to understand why it might have been characterized as such in the beginning. By the way, this is important to people like us because identifying what kind of an attack it is informs how we actually defend against it. So it might seem moot to some people, but it's in fact quite important as you think about defenses. So what really happened? What happened was the attacker found a vulnerability that they could request the Kaseya agent. And then via that support ticket upload feature, they could actually upload the malicious file, masking it with a digitally signed executable, and then distribute this out to all of the Kaseya agents that are out there. So you can see why this might have been characterized as supply chain, but it really, really wasn't. If you want details, they're here. You can get them from us or from other sources. The interesting thing to note is in number 2, they deployed legitimately Windows Defender, an earlier version, to Windows, and they used this in order to perform DLL side loading. These are all tactics to evade detection, to use tools that are legitimate on the endpoint. It's called living off the land, and in order to reduce your footprint and avoid or evade detection as much as you can. So what did NetSurian do? Well, first of all, knowing that it's a long weekend, the threat hunting team was in any case on high alert. These things have a tendency to happen during this time when everyone is snug in their bed, if you like. And we saw the chatter and we began to monitor it, and we acted that same day. By about 4 p.m., Kaseya had issued the advisory. By about 6 p.m., our threat center platform was updated. And anything that we knew at the time about the indicators of compromise, what this attack looks like, were already updated there. We looked at our prevention technique, which is event tracker endpoint security, and we're pleased to note that this would have does block that particular attack, even though that attack and that technique was not known previously. That's the beauty of event tracker endpoint security anyway. By 8 p.m., our marketing team working in overdrive had produced a threat advisory, posted it on the website. And because not many people would necessarily look at a website, particularly the day before the long weekend, we also proactively notified everyone via email, directing them to the advisory. And then the long weekend began. Throughout that weekend, our 24/7 SOC monitored new developments, updated the threat center platform with the IOCs, and updated our advisory as well. Proactively looked in our customer environments to see whether any of those indicators of compromise were present. Received a number of queries from customers, some of whom weren't even running Kaseya VSA, but because of the wide publicity given to this attack, became nervous that maybe they were affected. So we had to respond to customer inquiries all throughout the long weekend. So if you did have NetSurian's managed threat protection solutions, how exactly did they help in this kind of scenario? First, the really good news, prevention. If you can prevent the attack from occurring, then you don't have any cleanup or anything else to do. No recovery needed because you've prevented it. Event Tracker Endpoint Security did precisely that. Even though it didn't have an update specifically for this, that's the whole point. A deep learning based solution like this doesn't really require a signature or any updates to occur. Because of its deep learning, when something launches, it's able to examine that executable. And then if it's behaving suspiciously or has the characteristics of malware, why then it gets quarantined and blocked. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Can your EDR solution do this? That's something to inquire. What if you had the event tracker sensor, our essentials or enterprise offering? Well, various conditions that are in place there would alert you 24/7. This is even before we knew that such an attack was occurring. We alert on first time seen process launch. We alert on communications with external IP addresses when they're seen for the very first time. We worry about suspicious PowerShell. So all of these are in place, not just for the Kaseya problem, but for any other piece of software on a monitored endpoint. And these are all very relevant to this particular attack. Of course, after it became clear and we had updated the threat center platform, we knew specifically which IP addresses are being used, which hashes are running. And from that point forward, if any of that occurred, why then you were shut down. So this is how MTP solutions from NetSurian could actually help. So what have we learned? Well, first, if you're an MSP, for those of you that are a partner, you're under attack. This has been going on for some time, but this incident underlined it once again. They're attacking the tools you use, Kaseya VSA in this case, SolarWinds in the previous case. They're attacking your people. They're getting phished. They're, of course, after your customers. Did you notice that the attacker really wasn't after the MSP? They were after the MSP's customers. In the same way they weren't after SolarWinds, they were after those that use SolarWinds. They weren't after Microsoft. they were after those that used on-premise Exchange. Well, why MSPs? Well, simply because you have the keys to many kingdoms. They're seeing you as a vehicle to get to all of the customers that you manage. Therefore, the lesson learned, if you like, is you must protect your own operation. It is under attack. You need to adopt defense in depth and make sure that you're either monitoring all of this stuff 24/7 or you're turning to somebody like a NetSurian who does this for a living. Your customers are under attack too. Some of them, no doubt, said to themselves, ransomware? Well, that would happen to little old me. I'm just too small. Nobody cares. This business about being too small to be attacked is a myth. No such thing. And once again, this attack underlined it. If they are assuming that their old-timey defenses like legacy antivirus or that firewall they bought 5 years ago is up to the job, once again, it was proven that it isn't. If they are refusing this, then it's something to bring to their attention. Managed threat protection services are necessary to protect customers of every size. It's not just for the big boys. And then, of course, self-hosting. There is a tendency among MSPs in particular to prefer to buy the software, install a server on their premises and run that software. Did you notice that if you did that in the Kaseya VSA case, you were vulnerable, whereas if you let Kaseya host it, you were not. That same exact thing happened with Hafnium. If you ran Exchange on premise, you were vulnerable. Same exact software in Office 365 was not. What's up with that? Why does that happen? Well, it turns out that hosting is now not just hosting. There's a whole lot of stuff that you have to do. So in our case as well, when we host, there's a lot of stuff that we do above and beyond just plain hosting. For example, we certainly deploy event tracker endpoint security at all of our endpoints. And you notice that that in itself would have blocked this attack. We take network segmentation very seriously. You can't hop from one segment to the other easily. We use our own service to monitor ourselves 24/7. We've got a professionally managed web application firewall. In retrospect, if you had that in front of the Kaseya VSA properly configured, this attack would have failed. We do that all day long for our data center. And then last but not the least, you never want to rest on your laurels. You want somebody from the outside inspecting you. After all, sunshine is the best disinfectant. And so our stuff is externally audited to ISO 27001 standard, and that helps in making our hosting much more robust. So these are some lessons learned, if you like, from the attack. Well, thanks for your attention. I hope you got something useful out of this.